My name is Natalie Curry and I'm the General Manager of the Supply Chains at the ARA. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. For me, based in Canberra, this is the Ngunnawal people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. It's really great to be able to continue this webinar series with you and connect in this way, particularly as many of you are in lockdown or entering lockdown. Today's webinar is titled Project iTrace, Case Studies and the Benefits of Adopting a Standardised Approach. And Project iTrace is actually an initiative of the ARA and GS1 to standardise how components in the rail industry supply chain are identified. And today you'll hear a short overview of Project iTrace from Tony Repaci, the Account Director of Freight, Logistics and Industrial Sectors at GS1 Australia, who's on screen with me now, and then from our esteemed panellists who will share practical insights into the implementation of Project iTrace and how your organisation can also better trace components across their life cycle, reduce asset management costs and improve safety and reliability. So this is a great opportunity to hear from a variety of rail organisations and ask them questions so you can be better informed. I'll now hand over to Tony, who will provide you with a brief overview of Project iTrace, and I'll be back shortly to introduce the rest of our panellists. Thanks, Tony.
Great. Thanks a lot, Natalie, and thanks to the ARA for the opportunity to hold our panel discussion today. I'm going to go very briefly touch on just the main components around Project iTrace. So I'm assuming that we do have or have had a lot of information out in the market about the project, particularly if you are a rail supplier, an operator or a maintainer. So Project iTrace, as Natalie mentioned, is an initiative between the ARA and GS1 to standardise rail components. Project iTrace is actually an umbrella term encompassing a program of works around the implementation of GS1 standards. The main focus here is to identify, capture, share and use information about parts, components and assets that are used across the rail industry. I might just break down those 4 areas for you as well. So identification of parts and components is a pretty critical one. You know, we have a series of keys or standards that GS1 have developed around part identification. Once you've identified the part using a GS1 identifier, it's then a matter of actually encoding the information or marking the part or the asset with a barcode or another type of GS1 standard device. So again, we're talking about RFID tags, barcodes, whether they be a label barcode or etching into a metal surface. The third aspect is around sharing information. So we've been working across the industry for at least the last 12 or 18 months, developing material master data standards for the rail sector. And we were fortunate to have a board review from the ARA and approval to proceed with a platform to share master data, which is going to be the National Product Catalogue. And then finally, the use of the information. So once the information or the products have been identified, you can capture the information using barcodes or RFID readers. You're sharing the information. It's the use of that information. So again, we are providing GS1 standards for the format of the information that's going to be captured and shared, and then being able to use by each of the different players in the rail industry, whether they be a rail supplier, a maintainer, or a rail operator. So that's a very quick summary about Project iTrace. I might hand it back to Natalie now for further introductions.
Thanks so much, Tony. That was a really helpful explanation. It's certainly a great industry-led initiative, so let's find out more from industry themselves, shall we? Let me welcome to the screen 4 panellists in no particular order. We have Bill Stewart, who's the Material Data Manager, Logistics Service, Commercial and Supply Chain Engineering and Maintenance. Wowzers, Bill, you look after a lot. He's at Sydney Trains, and Bill's also the chair of the iTrace Industry Working Group. We've got Justin Bage, the Head of Engineering and Quality, Head of Fastening Systems Asia Pacific at Pandrol, and Stephen Baker, Head of Product Innovation and Through Life Support at Siemens, and Andrew Carroll, Managing Director at Cold Forge. Welcome, fellas. It's great to have you along. Please, can I encourage everyone, participants, to get on and ask your questions. You can post them at any time via the Q&A panel in your attendee control on the right hand of your screen. We really encourage this to be interactive, but I'll now hand over to Tony, who'll facilitate the questions. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Natalie. So we've actually prepared a couple of questions, probably to get the conversation going from most of you that are attending today. And I might open first, if I could direct my first question, I suppose, to Bill from Sydney Trains. I suppose, could we perhaps get a bit of an understanding how, or sorry, when you actually started implementing Project iTrace, and why you actually chose to get on board, I suppose.
Sure. Well, we actually started with iTrace back in the right in the beginning of 2015, and our Associate Director of Supply Chain, Mr. Tony Annetts, was the chair of the iTrace working group at the time, and he was involved in the early days, scoping out the overall objective and setting the standard and everything. Personally, I got involved back in March 2019. I was tapped on the shoulder and said, "Hey, you look after materials data, so maybe we should be looking into some of this." And I then sort of became the co-chair on the Material Master Data Work Group. So really for Sydney Trains, it was obvious that we could see that there would be a lot of benefits to us to be able to better identify materials, both in our warehouse, in our supply chain, and actually on track as well. One of the common problems that we have is being able to identify what's been installed out there, especially when it's been there for many years. So we know that it's not going to happen overnight, and not everything is going to be identified with the barcode straight away. But we recognise that as soon as we start marking things, making sure that when they go out and get installed and they're identified clearly, we know that eventually over time everything is going to be identified, and it's going to help us to maintain things faster, more effectively. We can make sure that we get the right part into the right place at the right time, minimise maintenance downtime, and speed up sort of maintenance activities.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. I suppose if I could ask, I suppose a similar question, Steve, from Siemens. Can perhaps get a bit of a background as to your participation in the program and when it actually kicked off at Siemens?
We really started in late 2017, where our executive had decided through their association with the ARA that it was a necessary program for us to join along with. We got a consultant in to do a factory tour and advisors to us, and we ended up with a advisory report back in February 2018. And then finally, we got the budget signed off and the project signed off in August 2018. So it took us quite a while to actually realise what we had to do. During that period of time, we were members of the ARA committee as well. So we were certainly on the inside, but there's a lot of ducks you need to get in a row, and things like business cases and budgets all needed to be done. So we put our foot on the gas in August 2018. The main rationale behind it is to say it was our executive team said that this is the way the industry is going into the future. Siemens, by nature, are a good corporate citizen, and we follow standards and we sort of play the main game. So we feel it's essential for us as a business to adopt iTrace. We'll talk about later about some of the benefits from it, but initially it was really a question of our intention to join the party.
Right. And your particular role, is that, is it the right place for Project iTrace to be under your responsibility, or in hindsight would it have been across a different discipline?
There is no, iTrace touches so much of a business. There is no single right place. It's a supply chain issue. It's an IT issue. It's an engineering issue. It's a project management issue. So you could pick any subsection of your business, and ultimately they have to reach out to all the other things. Now, my position of head of innovation and through life support really is we manage everything which is new. We manage all products in the field, that myself and my team. So it seemed that we were probably the right people to be customer facing. Behind the scenes, we've got supply chain working feverishly background. We're putting new IT infrastructure in place. All of those things have been done, and they're being done by the appropriate teams. So it's really a matter of coordination, I think.
Right. Okay. No, thanks a lot. Andrew, could I ask you a similar question? You're the leader of the team at Cold Forge, so you've taken on that responsibility yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. We joined, I think, mid-2019 in the Material Master Data Committee with Bill and I think most others here. The driver for us was, fundamentally it was customer driven at the outset. So customers were asking for this, and that was important to us. That's a sort of key metric in our business. And then there are a bunch of flow-on benefits for us internally. Speaking a common language in the industry, there are huge benefits in that. Central data repository in terms of the National Product Catalogue, removing data duplication and data errors, which, is just a nature of, I'm sure, what we all see every day in transcription of things in between organisations and inaccuracies that only lead to people not getting what they want when they need it. So the idea from my point of view of a centralised repository via the National Product Catalogue and removing data duplication, having a single source of truth, had a great appeal. In my organisation, it sits with me as we're a fairly small organisation, so we're very lean. So those that don't fit in another box fit with me. So it's fallen into my bailiwick there.
Right. And with the way that Cold Forge manufactures your product, so have you been able to manage that process? I know, a lot of products perhaps are contract manufactured for you. So that process of product identification by, your potential suppliers or contract partners, how has that gone with that engagement?
So yeah, you're right. We design and we cause to have built. So we subcontract our manufacturer through America, China, and Europe. Look, that process hasn't been particularly difficult. It in fact makes it somewhat easier. At the moment, we probably have 10 different labelling standards for different customers. So the simplification of that to one generic standard and removing some of the time-related labelling that we currently do. So, where a customer might require their PO number on the label, removing that where it's linked back to a batch, which happens at time of production, is a great benefit from our point of view because it means less rework when we bring the product in, which is significant. So there's a significant benefit to having the product labelled with batch-related data that is static, if you like, for that batch, and then is common use through the industry. That has great appeal from our point of view. And, reducing waste, reducing cost, particularly time-related cost and time and labour, that has appeal. Right.
Okay, thank you for that. Justin, I suppose being, again, another manufacturer, some of the opportunity, I suppose, that you've been able to take advantage of, being able to take information from your upstream suppliers and using that information in a format. I suppose, could you perhaps give us a little bit of background about your operations and then perhaps some of those opportunities that you've taken to streamline your manufacturing process as a result.
Yeah, certainly. So we're a manufacturer in Sydney. We take in raw materials from various suppliers and turn that into product, which we then sell to people like Sydney Trains and others. So we were introduced to iTrace on the back of some work that we'd done with InfraBuild, which was One Steel at the time, on barcoding of their product, which is our raw material. And we saw some immediate improvements in our capture of traceability information from the raw material that was coming into our store, where we used to transcribe paperwork onto our paperwork and then into our ERP system. We now do that digitally without any pen touching paper at all. So that's been a massive benefit to us. And we can see the opportunities for that to then flow through the rest of our process, and then that traceability information being able to flow on to our customers when they start using the information that's now on our products.
Great. Now, that's excellent. So again, I suppose the cycle starts, prior to you finishing your products. You're using the information as a feed into your manufacturing process. Awesome. Okay. I suppose just another question, perhaps for you, Justin. When you went about, you've got a variety of different types of products. You've got metal-based products, you've got plastic-based or polycarbonate-based products, and you also do, weld kits as an example, your organisation does. So when you went about looking at the types of barcoding substrates, so labels versus perhaps swing tags and other types of technologies, what did you use as the evaluation criterion, and what did you ultimately select?
So we've limited our labelling to the smallest exterior packaging. So labelling all of our individual items, we make so many clips that really we can't afford to be labelling each one of those individually. So we keep our labelling to the packaging level for our mass-produced products. So that's clips, insulators, pads, that kind of thing. And then our individual products like weld kits and hand tools and other things like that, they are labelled on an individual level, but we're using effectively just printed stick-on labels for all of our labelling requirements. That suits us fine.
Excellent. Okay. I suppose, can I ask that question of you, Bill, as well? I know, Sydney Trains has a small manufacturing facility as well as, being an operator. So, predominantly running a warehouse. So what sort of evaluation did you go through when you looked at, marking the products in your warehouse as well as in your manufacturing facility?
Yeah, well, that's right. We do have a manufacturing capability, and we supply materials not only to ourselves but to other external parties as well. So we recognise that we have a responsibility as a supplier to be able to mark those products. And similar, I suppose, in that we can't necessarily mark everything due to size or shape. So a dropper, for example, which is in a sort of 6 millimetre diameter copper wire, it's a bit hard to put an indelible mark on that, but we will need to make sure that from a warehousing point of view, there is a tag on there. And we looked at various mechanisms, different sorts of tags, and pretty much we've come up with a couple of solutions. One is that for packaging and for anything which we can't laser mark, we're just using a synthetic paper label printed on a separate Datamax printer, which has both human readable and barcode on the label. For anything else which we want to indelibly marked, we looked at dot peening, we looked at engraving, and we sort of landed on laser engraving as much as possible. So that gives us versatility. We can mark on various different surfaces, different shapes, curved surfaces, and so on. So whether it's painted or plated or plain steel, and anything which might be too big to physically manhandle into the laser engraver, we'll look at using an anti-salmon plate, which gives very good contrast, very good readability, and very good durability. And I understand that GS1 have a list of good technology providers who are tried and trusted, and know what the barcoding standards are. So, you know, they can help anybody to find the right technology that they need for their business.
Right. Yeah, no, that's right, Bill. We, you know, on our website, we do have a solution provider portal, as well as the ability, if you are a, you know, a supplier and you're looking for different types of technologies, that you can actually search on, you know, various different specialists, I suppose would be, for want of a better term. I suppose, could I ask the same question of you, Andrew, around, you know, the materials that, or the products that you manufacture, the types of technologies that you looked at, and then what you ultimately decided on for part marking?
Yeah, certainly, Tony. We're similar to Justin in a number of respects, in that our products are utilised in the thousands of, well, they're not necessarily a consumable. They are not of a size where, or an application where individual labelling is appropriate or cost effective. So we label down to the smallest packaging unit, similar to Justin, and we've continued to use labels that are tried and tested over the, you know, past 15, 20 years of supply that we've had in the space, which are, I want to call it a poly type label, that, you know, adheres to the cardboard packaging. We also have some poly bags that we use where the label is stitched onto that, but again in a format where the label retains its integrity in sunlight. If it's exposed to sunlight for a period of time, which often our products are, they'll sit outside for a couple of months and can still be utilised. So they're really our only two type adhesive or a stitched on label on the smallest unit of packaging that we have.
Right. And look, I think, you know, you know, yourself, Justin, and Bill and Andrew have made a really good point about, you know, how would you barcode, you know, the smallest components, and as you've made the point, Andrew, you know, you look at the smallest packaging item rather than the individual item itself. So, you know, we've had a lot of questions over, you know, the last 6 or so months where, you know, with people looking at beginning the iTrace journey and questioning, you know, do I need to barcode, you know, a nut and a bolt or a washer? And you really don't. You know, the packaging, whether it be, you know, packed in a box, in a bag, that is probably sufficient for identification for those very small, low value items. So, Steve, could I ask you that same question, because your business is possibly a little bit different. You're manufacturing components both locally and overseas. Your range of products are anything from electronic equipment through to, you know, large items, you know, made out of steel and other products. And you also, you know, Siemens puts solutions together. So you might also be working with other suppliers as part of the overall package. So how have you gone about the process of identifying what is the best type of marking technology?
Well, we actually have a whole smorgasbord of labels when we did analysis of our stuff, like, for instance, some of our larger items of equipment, which are point machines and such. We have a company label we put on the outside. It's a metallic label, so we direct laser engrave that particular label. We don't directly mark the workpiece, we mark the label which is attached to the workpiece. Inside those bits of equipment, first line replaceable items are marked with a polymer type label because they're not exposed to the sun, because they're within inside the equipment itself, but they are very robust and abrasion resistance. And then we have a range of paper labels for packaging, and even in for marking our internal stock locations and such, we do the same. We also have introducing a very, very small labels, which are only probably 30 millimeters long by about 10 millimeters wide. And that's a label that's really great for small first line replaceable items inside equipment, because you can get a data matrix in there and 2 lines of human readable in there. And that's really means you can get more information, whereas before all we had was a serial number. Things like enclosures where we're integrating into a system. Again, the unit itself has got an indelible label on the outside, which is laser engraved, but all the items inside are a polymer type label. And then also when the whole thing is finished, we can actually scan the contents and do a parent-child relationship. When we get down to individual components, like everyone else has suggested, it's impractical to mark small components. And so therefore we tend to mark the packaging. But also one of the other important things is on your commercial documentation, like delivery dockets, to have the correct GTIN and such on the delivery docket as well, because it was mentioned before, Andrew mentioned that, you know, one source of truth, one form of communication, and that's the way we can communicate with each other.
Okay.
So no simple solution.
Yeah, and I suppose we've run workshops, or one workshop this year, and you know we had a very good uptake, but we did talk about again the challenges and also the solutions or potential solutions for products that are typically found in the rail sector, which can include anything from wooden sleepers, concrete sleepers, to metal products, rubber, polycarbonate, electronic equipment. So again, the range of different types of parts and assets that do need to be marked is quite wide ranging. And so, but I suppose the positive thing is that there are quite a lot of different technologies, and I suppose the examples that the four of you have given me today, pretty much cover the majority of the types of components and assets that are used in the rail sector, and you've found solutions for each of your individual products, which is great. I suppose if I could, a question that I've been asked again by suppliers is, what does actual project iTrace compliance mean? Is there a percentage that, if I complete a project by a certain date, am I compliant, or do I have to follow a set of steps or a program? I suppose, could I ask each of you, in your own mind, what does compliance to Project iTrace actually mean to you in your organisation? So maybe if I could start with you, Bill.
Yeah, sure. I suppose it's we're probably going to be on a never-ending journey to be compliant, because we're always coming up with new products. But if we put a line in the sand, we would say that for us as a supplier, we would be compliant when all of the products that we on-sell to others or put into a warehouse are identified some way with a GS1 compliant label barcode. So that's probably the simple thing. And it's not going to be just everything that we make in our own factory, but we do get things supplied from other suppliers as well, manufactured for us to our design, to our specification. So we will be responsible for assigning those a barcode or a GTIN, Global Trade Item Number, and asking those third-party suppliers, manufacturers, to put that barcode identification on for us. So as a supplier, that would be our first level of compliance, along with being able to share that data in GS1's National Product Catalogue. And now that is the central repository, one-stop shop, so you should be able to get all of the basic data for our materials. As an operator, I would say the full compliance will be when we can actually scan any barcodes coming into us, any compliant barcodes, and we can transact those through our ERP and EAM systems. So that'll be all the way from receipt through the warehousing functions, stock take, replenishment out to remote sites, and down to the issuing of those materials onto a maintenance work order. In terms of overall compliance of everything which is in track, we know that is going to take many, many, many years, considering that we do have assets which are out in fact, which could have been installed 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years ago.
Yes.
And in fact, even though the barcodes have been around for about 40 odd years, I'm pretty sure that we've got a few things installed prior to them. So we know that not everything that is out there has been identified, and we know that it is a long way to go before everything that is installed has been identified. But hey, if we don't start at some stage, we are never going to get to a stage where we can say that even 50% of our critical assets are identified clearly. So Yep, it's going to be a long path, but the sooner you start, the sooner you can get it done.
I think you make a good point, Bill, that, it is a continuous improvement process. It is a process that will be multi-year. And for some organisations, it could go on for a long period of time, possibly, 5 to 10 years as an example. But, it's starting the program is always the first big step.
Yeah, and I see that there has been a question coming as well, asking about what happens when you've got fairly old things which are out on track and takes a fallen off, you don't have a serial number on there. I suppose what it comes down to is that if there is no serial number on there from the manufacturer or supplier, if there's no way of identifying that number plate in effect, well, that is the time when maybe you can assign your own serial number to it. And from that point on, at least you can identify that item as a unique part.
Okay. I suppose, could I ask you the same question, Andrew?
Sure, Tony. So for us, I think the first step is along our journey is not managing it by exception. So at the moment, we're managing it by exception, and then that's moving to having it across the board implemented on all products we supply to the rail industry. The second part of that is the words and music lining up, so the packaging lining up with the paperwork and having the common documentation that Steve was referring to earlier, where you've got that linkage between your paperwork and G-tins on your paperwork as well as on the packaging, and linking those together. So, full compliance for us, I think, is a far less difficult task for the Sydney trades. And to flush our stock through is probably a 12-month exercise, potentially longer, 12 months on our fast-moving stock, or faster-moving stock. But some of our stock is quite slow-moving due to low demand. So it'll be a couple of years. So full compliance, I think, is everything labelled, paperwork and packaging matching. And that will be a couple of years for us, I would think, to cover probably about 85% of our products.
Okay, great. There is a question, Georgie. So Georgie's question is, how long does it take a business to fully adopt Project iTrace? I suppose, I think some of the answers that Bill and Andrew have just given Georgie give you an indication. It is a matter of taking the first steps to get your project approved by your management, and then there's also probably the need to start getting educated about the GS1 standards and the program itself. But just to get started, to be fully adopted, I think you can possibly get your part marking. Your product identification done very quickly by just assigning G-tins to all of the components that you do either manufacture or manage. Part markings is a bigger task. Again, if you can do it as you're manufacturing the component. If you have to do it retrospectively, that is a bigger piece of work where Andrew made the point going back to stock that you've already got on the warehouse shelves, and even in Bill's situation. But again, it depends on the size of your organisation and how much product you're talking about. And then the sharing of information on the material master data on the MPC. Again, that's just another program of work. So again, it's hard to give you an exact date and time, but it's a process that as you can hear from these organisations, that will take anywhere from 6 months for quite a small organisation with a limited product set to possibly many years if you are a very large organisation. Justin, I suppose, can I ask you, what does Project iTrace compliance mean to you and Pandrol?
Yeah, I think Bill and Andrew have both hit on very important points, and for us, we're along the lines of very much what Andrew said. Being able to supply product to our customers that they can then read in digitally using a barcode. So having useful information on the product that we supply to them that they can read in digitally, and having a common language that both businesses understand. So, for Pandrol, I think the important thing is to have a system in place that manages the allocation and the recording of the GTINs, which is the identification number for the product, and then being able to attach the correctly configured labels to the product so that they're readable by the customer when they arrive.
Okay, great. And finally, Steve, was there anything perhaps different from what's already been said by the other three guys?
In its purest form, being GS1 compliance, in my opinion, is to be ability to trade using GTINs. Everyone focuses on marking and barcoding and things like that, but they're simply mechanisms for carrying the GTIN around. So there's no point marking if you can't trade using the GTIN. So if you see it as a multi-layer cake, the foundation or the base is to be GS1 compliant in your business systems. That's to be able to receive requests for components or orders from a customer referencing in GTIN, place the orders via that, and then deliver via that. And then, as we've all said, in our industry, we're not going to mark everything. It's not possible. It's not practical. We'll be marking containers. We'll be marking shipping documentation. So they are become the layers upon that. So, when you talk about a simple, if you had a product, a supplier only supplied one item, you could become GS1 compliant in the afternoon. But large organisations like the ones we've got here tend to take a long time. But we, and I know Sydney Trains, have also undertaken significant IT upgrades as part of this. So we can't always say that the delay was caused by GS1. There are other systems that we took the opportunity to improve as part of this process. And that tends to make the whole thing neat. So full compliance with marking everything. As I said, trade using GTINs, mark what the client needs, mark the thing, that's compliance. There is also another prong to this attack, is that there are already contracts out there mandating GS1 compliance and GS1 marking in the rail industry right now. So there are already contractors now who have to, even if someone made marking by exception, even have to do pilot programs to be able to comply with the requirements of those contracts.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Tony, just picking up on something Stephen said, the contrast between large and small organisations and your readiness depends on your back-end systems and your back-end general software system that you're using. So, that's probably a first hurdle for smaller organisations to be able to implement GS1 compliance is having a system with enough beef that's suitable to implement GS1 and manage that internally. So we were fortunate in that we'd already adopted SAP Business One, the SME version of SAP, 5 or 6 years ago. So that made the step towards joining the program a whole lot simpler. Otherwise, we would have had to go through that software upgrade internally first.
Okay, no, that's a really good point. Exactly, there are requirements from your, as you say, your back end systems to make sure that you've got the capability and the horsepower in your systems to be able to manage the additional information that you've got. But from a benefits perspective, though, Andrew, once you've got that framework in place, are you now seeing that you're able to capture a lot more information and more attributes than you have previously?
Oh, hugely. Yeah. At many different levels, not only on the GS1 side, but our adoption of SAP B1 allowed us to go completely non-paper internally, which was just a massive leap forward. And accuracy of data, accuracy of shipments, reduced error rates to close to zero. There were many other benefits, and the amount of data we can now capture within an SAP was vastly different to what we had been using. And flexibility there too, if we needed to add things that were specific to us. We desperately tried not to customise, given that we are an SME, and customisation of software when you're an SME is is a road to certain death. Well, that's our view. Increased cost, and you know, if it's good enough for the other 60 or so thousand users out there, we figured we'll make it work in our business, and sure enough, we have been able to. So yeah.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. Well, that might be a good segue. I think there were a few comments made by most of you around master data and the sharing of master data. So I might, you know, perhaps if I could perhaps ask Bill, because I know Bill has been very much instrumental in leading one of the work groups for the last 18 months or maybe a little bit longer around material master data. So perhaps, Bill, could I ask you, could you just give us a little bit of a background to the process that the work group undertook around developing the key attributes that you wanted to share, the data that you wanted to share as an industry, and how that then culminated in perhaps adopting the MPC platform as a vehicle for sharing that information?
Yep, sure. Well, we pretty much looked at all of the companies who were involved in the material work group, and that involved the rail providers around the country, and plus Kiwi Rail as well, and many suppliers as well, to look at the data sets that we had for our material data and what we felt was critical or important in terms of being able to share. And this is where we sort of came up with a few interesting comparisons of what people really needed to know about a material. And more importantly, how we could actually talk about those materials using a common language. So ideally, everybody calls a bolt a bolt, but you know, some people might call it a threading rod for some reason. So coming down to how we could best describe our products was sort of fairly important, and we sort of put forward some standards which we use internally with Sydney trains, and that's now available to share as an indication of how a description can be formatted. Although not everybody's going to follow that, because we understand that also people have their own rules within their own organisations, and you know, have to defer to a higher power. But we looked at the other attributes on the materials, dimensional data, which is very nice to have if you're looking at warehousing, if you want to know how much space you need to take into your warehouse, the weights of materials, so that you can take that into account for sort of shipping. If you're arranging transportation, you need to know the weight of your shipment. And the unit of measure probably came down as one of the most important things. You need to know whether you're looking at inches, kilograms, tons, or whatever. So I think the GS1 standard, it's pretty much sort of tied into unit of measure for that item. We had many discussions over many months, and it probably took us about a year altogether to sort of come up with a list of 70 or so attributes which we felt were key to a material. Out of those, a subset are mandatory, including the description and the unit of measure, and many others became either conditional or optional, depending on what level of data the company had. So we've tried to keep it simple as possible, without creating too much of a burden for any organisation to go out on a massive data collection exercise. Saying that, it did take Sydney Trains probably about a 4-month concerted exercise to gather all of that information that wasn't already captured in our ERP system, to collect the data on about 1,100 materials. So it is achievable. It does take a bit of resource, and it just take a bit of time, but you know, we'd hope that once that data is collected, it is then available through the MPC to be shared with our trading partners. So if they're looking at putting something into their own warehouse, they don't need to go and collect that data themselves. So that will be the beauty, the value of the MPC to us, is that we wouldn't need to pass that data on to other people. They can get it through the MPC. And similarly, for any materials coming into our warehouse, we would hope to be able to source that data from the NPC. Same consistent format every time.
Great. Okay, thanks, Bill. That's great. I know, we thank you for leading that particular work group, because there was a lot of work, and also a lot of you had a lot of support also, I know, from other operators as well as suppliers that all contributed to developing those standards. So it was great. I suppose if I could perhaps ask you, Steve, you've also been involved, from a material master data work group perspective, but also on the national product catalogue. So from your perspective, what benefits are you going to see, or Siemens going to see, from being able to utilise the MPC to share information about your products with your customers?
Well, one of the first things, and Bill touched on it before, is rail is a very old industry, and the number of colloquialisms out there are quite amazing. And when people phone up looking for something, the way they describe things can be very, very creative, and it's just, and the local names are just crazy. So Bill and I had this discussion the other week, and I said, we can correct that. And he said, well, hang on a minute, we may not want you to correct it. We may like the way we call it. So it's an interesting aspect of the industry. One of the areas that we see as a real benefit from them is some of the additional information we can put into the NPC. Now, we've been working with GS1 on some of the apps that they're looking at, where we can embed additional data into the NPC, where, for instance, the end user can get access to the necessary documentation, or even a pointer to that documentation, so that when a maintainer's in the field, they can use the GTIN. They can scan back to NPC, and NPC can point them to all the necessary documentation. So it's got multiple uses. Yes, moving data backwards and forwards, and save us having to somehow send copies of Excel spreadsheets backwards and forwards, which is a current way of exchanging data. It simplifies all of that. We have a simple load tool where we can load from our systems into the NPC. So, there was mentioned before about one source of truth. The same data is just simply ported from system to system to system, and there's no opportunity to be creative about it. It is the real data.
Great. No, thanks, Steve. And Andrew, if I could ask you, I know you were also involved in a pilot as well. So from your organisation's perspective, when you had to share data with your customers, what sort of exercise was that for your product teams, and what's the MPC going to be able to do for those people now?
So it was the same process as Steve was describing. It was Excel spreadsheets, which is a snapshot at a point in time, and therefore largely irrelevant. So the beauty of the MPC, from my point of view, there's a couple of benefits. One, internally, it's caused us to health our data. So, taking Bill's good advice on our naming conventions, we have standardised on that as our naming convention, and literally healthing our way through our entire inventory listing and inventory descriptions. And we're basically getting our inventory data in the format that is ready to do a complete upload to the MPC. So it's helped us health our data. That's great. That's deduping, removing confusing conventions, making things easy to find. And we too will bulk upload to MPC through a tool, which means that we're back to that single source of truth, where the MPC exactly matches what we've got in our own system.
Okay, great. We've had another question. How many rail organisations in the industry have already adopted, and is this becoming required by operators and OEMs as contractual requirements? So I suppose I can answer the first question. Globally, we have probably in excess of about 500 to 600 organisations, rail organisations, that are on this journey. At a local level, we have probably in excess of 100 organisations that are members of GS1 and are going through the process of evaluating. So some have already started the journey, some are in pilot, others are still going through their education process. So we've still got a bit of a way to go. The good thing is, I don't think there are many organisations that don't know about GS1 and GS1 standards. I know locally we have over 22,000 members across 20 different industry sectors. So this is not, a small process or a small isolated set of standards. This is we are part of a global organisation, and we have many hundreds of thousands of members using GS1 standards every day. So the ARA, industry suppliers, operators and maintainers have really, I suppose, looked to GS1 standards as a way to kind of taking their industry from being quite an analog style industry to a digital style industry. I suppose if I could ask you the second part of the question, Bill, so is this becoming required by operators and OEMs as contractual requirements?
Certainly it is. We are making sure that any new contracts which are signed with any of our material suppliers include a clause that parts must be identified. We'll be clarifying that statement because we understand that the clause that had been entered into a few contracts a few years ago was a little bit on the vague side, but the intention is clear that anything coming into our warehouse and being installed on track should be identified with a GS1 compliant barcode. Even though our preference, we're looking at the data matrix, the two-dimensional barcode, which looks similar to a QR code, which I'm sure with COVID check-ins, everybody's more than familiar with that now. The data matrix looks similar, but it's slightly different. So once you've been working with barcodes for a while, you'll be able to tell the difference between the two. But the standard one-dimensional sort of barcode that you get on retail products would also be acceptable and readable by all of our products as well. The reason why we're going with the data matrix is that it can hold more data in terms of production dates, serial numbers, batch numbers. So we are definitely making sure that all contracted materials will be identified, and we'll be pushing that harder over the next year or so. And anything as well that we get from non-contract suppliers, we will be asking that materials are identified with the barcode as well. So it really shouldn't be considered as new technology that's, we're introducing something that's never been done before. Let's consider that retail introduced the barcode over 40 odd years ago. I think it's 41 years ago since Wrigley's chewing gum was the first product scanned in a supermarket over in the US. So we're just trying to sort of get on board with that. So it's nothing magic. It's just coming up with technology that's been available for many, many years.
Great. No, thanks. I suppose, could I ask you that same question, Justin, perhaps from a different perspective, because your organisation has, quite a few suppliers as well when you bring your solutions together. So how are you approaching that requirement with your supply chain?
So we've engaged GS1 to assist us with a specification document, so something that outlines our requirements as a business, but also the iTrace and the GS1 requirements for global compliance. And we intend on sort of issuing that to all of our suppliers, to help us make sure that all of our products are labelled correctly and contain all the right information so that it can be read up and down the supply chain.
Great. No, thanks for that. I suppose Andrew or Steve, are you dealing with the same sorts of challenges with your upstream suppliers, and how are you going to go about managing that?
We have both upstream and downstream challenges. As mentioned, we have entered into contracts where, as part of a project, GS1 compliance is a requirement for supply to the project. And that also involves, as a system integrator, additional companies which weren't part of the original GS1 net that was cast out. So we're seeking help from GS1 to produce documentation to pass down to these suppliers to bring them on. So it's very easy as a business to identify your principal suppliers and enter into a meaningful dialogue with them. But when you look at a major system integration, if you're not careful, you can be blindsided because there are many other suppliers which aren't part of your daily game, and therefore you need to engage them. So we're working on that, as I said, with the assistance of GS1.
Okay. Andrew, I know you've got a lot of control over your supply chain, but have you got any external companies that you would require these standards to be adhered to as well?
Yes, so certainly. So all of our suppliers would obviously need to adhere to the standards. At the moment, stage one for us is we are generating the labels internally and sending them electronically to our suppliers. Stage two will be giving them sufficient skills and data to be able to generate those labels themselves. But in the initial stage, when you've got container loads full of product with many thousands and thousands and thousands of boxes, control at the early stages is something that we're trying to maintain and ensure we get right labelling, and while we go through the upskilling process with the suppliers.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Thanks a lot. I suppose my last question would be, and again, I would put this out to all of you, not just ask any person individually, but you know, what have been the benefits of implementing Project iTrace in your organisations? I know you're all still on that journey, so by no means is it a complete exercise, but what have you been able to, or what do you anticipate being some of the benefits to your own organisations?
Well, for City Trains, it's even though we've been involved for several years now, we are still early on track, but certainly having to think about how you identify things and making sure that things clearly are identified. It's good to sort of regroup and look at your processes and how you mark things, and just bring things up into the modern era, which I think is going to be good for all of us.
Yeah. Okay.
I might jump in here. One of the other areas that we see as a benefit, firstly, as I mentioned before, is take an opportunity to do an IT refresh, which means that all internal manufacturing job components are all scanned between jobs. That's still in the process of being implemented. So that gives us a issue of where we got less mistakes being made, no need for stock takes and all sorts of other benefits that flow into the business directly. And furthermore, as a manufacturer of safety critical equipment for the rail, traceability is foremost in our minds. And within the data matrix, we can do serialization, and it gives us a much more rapid traceability of components. So there's lots of benefits to the business. We see those benefits, but as I said, it's a work in progress, and we'll see what happens when it's fully implemented.
Great. Okay, thanks, Steve. I suppose Justin or Andrew, with any final comments from your own experiences so far?
I think we're only scratching the surface in our business of what GS1 and product identification can do for us. So we're going down the road of implementing that internally, as well as being able to provide it externally. But certainly the data integrity and error reduction is one of the key benefits that we can see using the system.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much. Well, look, we've only got about a minute left, so I might hand it back to Natalie. I'd like to thank all of you, so Bill, Steve, Andrew and Justin, for your time today. I really appreciate your insights as to how you've been able to start the journey on Project iTrace. So over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Tony. And again, add my thanks to Tony's. It was really great to hear about the take up, and I really can't wait to see the rail industry when it's fully implemented Project iTrace and realising the complete benefits of this standardised approach. So I have included in the Q&A chat GS1's website, www.gs1au.org, and Tony's email. So please follow up with him to get more information and more specific, I guess, tailored answers for your organisation. I really do want to plug Frauscher, who is our sponsor for the ARA webinar series. It's wonderful to have them sponsor these information sessions, and I hope everyone that participated today found it really valuable. I will be sending out a short feedback survey that will be circulated to everyone, and we encourage you to complete that. But on behalf of the ARA, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Bill, Justin, Stephen. It's great to have you give up this time this afternoon and share with us your journey. So stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, all.